The fluorescent lights of Kansas City General Hospital cast harsh shadows across the empty corridors at 5 a.m., illuminating a figure that shouldn't have been there. Harold Hank Pemberton, 79 years old, dragged his aching body down the hallway, pushing a janitor's cart with hands that trembled from exhaustion and arthritis. His shoulders, once broad and strong from decades of honest work, now curved under the weight of desperation. Every step was a struggle, every breath a reminder that his body had passed its limits long ago. But the bills kept coming, and Dorothy needed him to keep going. Hank paused to catch his breath, leaning heavily against his mop bucket. A violent coughing fit seized him, echoing through the sterile silence. His legs wobbled, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he might collapse right there in the hallway. That's when Travis Kelce rounded the corner. The NFL star had been visiting sick children in the pediatric ward, something he did quietly without media attention. But seeing this elderly man struggling alone in the pre-dawn darkness stopped him cold. "Sir, are you okay?" Travis asked, genuine concern filling his voice as he approached. Hank straightened quickly, embarrassed to be caught in a moment of weakness. His weathered face flushed with pride and shame. "I'm fine, son. Just a little tired." But Travis could see past the words. He saw the tremor of his gnarled hand, the exhaustion etched in every line of that aged face, the way Hank gripped the mop handle like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "How long have you been working here?" Travis asked gently. Hank hesitated. The question was simple, but the answer would reveal everything he'd been trying to hide. The desperation, impossible choice between his wife's life and his own dignity. The way the American dream had become a nightmare for two people who had worked hard their entire lives. 3 years, Hank finally whispered, his voice breaking slightly, "since Dorothy got sick." Travis felt something crack inside his chest. Here was a man, nearly 80 years old, working through the night to save the woman he loved, while Travis made more money in one game than this man would see in a lifetime. "Sir, Travis started to speak, but stopped himself. What he was about to discover would shock him to his core, and what he would do about it would change both their lives forever. But first, he needed to hear the whole story. "Dorothy's my wife," Hank continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Been married 52 years come December. Breast cancer, stage 3. The doctors say she's got a fighting chance." His voice trailed off as he stared down at his worn-out sneaker, the same pair he'd been wearing for 3 years of night shift. Travis felt his heart sink as he watched this proud man struggle with words that shouldn't have to be spoken by anyone, especially not someone who should be enjoying retirement with his beloved wife. "But the treatments are expensive," Travis said, finishing the thought that Hank couldn't bring himself to say. $23,000 a month, Hank replied, the number falling from his lips like a death sentence. "Insurance covers about 60%, but that still leaves us with more than $9,000 every month. My Social Security and her teacher's pension together don't even come close to covering that." The math was brutal and simple. Travis could spend $9,000 on dinner without thinking twice, while this man was destroying his body night after night just to keep his wife alive. The inequality was so stark, it felt almost surreal. "So I came back to work," Hank continued, gripping his mop handle tighter. "Used to be a maintenance supervisor at the old Ford plant before it closed down. Worked there 38 years. Never thought I'd be mopping floors at my age, but pride don't pay medical." Travis watched as Hank resumed his work, moving slowly but methodically down the hallway. Each motion was deliberate, practice, the routine of someone who had learned to push through pain because stopping wasn't an option. The sight of this elderly man working with such quiet dignity in the middle of the night was both inspiring and heartbreaking. "How many hours do you work?" Travis asked, falling into step beside him. 40 hours a week here. Plus, I clean 3 office buildings on weekends. Sometimes I pick up extra shifts when they need someone to cover. Mike Rodriguez, he's my supervisor. He's been real good about giving me opportunities for overtime." Travis did the math quickly in his head. At minimum wage, even with overtime, Hank was probably making less than $1,500 a week before taxes. After 50 years of honest work, this man was literally working himself to death just to afford to keep his wife alive. "She don't know how many hours I work," Hank said quietly. "I tell her it's just part-time, something to keep me busy. She worries enough without knowing the truth." They had reached the end of the hallway, where a small break room housed a few vending machines and plastic chairs. Hank sat down heavily, his breathing labored from the exertion of walking and talking. In the harsh fluorescent light, Travis could see just how thin the old man had become, how his work uniform hung loose on his shrinking frame. "You love her very much," Travis said. It wasn't a question. "More than my own life," Hank replied without hesitation. "Dorothy taught second grade for 35 years. Thousands of kids learned to read because of her. She deserves better than this. She deserves to fight this disease without worrying about money, without watching me work myself into the ground." Travis felt a decision crystallizing in his mind. Without saying another word, he pulled out his phone and started making some calls. By the time the sun rose over Kansas City that morning, the Pemberton family's medical bills for the next 3 months had been quietly paid in full. Hank didn't learn about Travis's intervention until he received a call from the hospital's billing department 3 days later. The news hit him like a physical blow. Relief so intense it brought him to tears, followed immediately by embarrassment and confusion. How could he accept such an enormous gift from a stranger? When Travis returned to the hospital later that week, he found Hank waiting for him in the lobby, still wearing his janitor's uniform, but standing straighter than he had in months. "I don't know how to thank you," Hank said, his voice thick with emotion. "For the first time in 3 years, I slept 8 hours straight." Dorothy noticed the difference right away. "But I have to ask, why would you do this for someone you barely know?" "Because everyone deserves to take care of the people they love without having to destroy themselves in the process," Travis replied simply. "And because 38 years at the Ford plant means something. 52 years of marriage means something. What you're doing for Dorothy means something." For 2 weeks, the pressure was off. Hank was able to reduce his hours slightly, spending more time with Dorothy during her treatments. He even bought her flowers for the first time in months, a small gesture that brought tears to both their eyes. But then, Dr. Margaret Steinberg called them into her office with news that would shatter their temporary peace. "The current treatment isn't working as well as we hope," Dr. Steinberg explained gently. "Dorothy's cancer has spread to her lymph nodes. There's an experimental treatment that's showing remarkable results, but it's not covered by insurance. The cost would be approximately $80,000. Hank felt the room spinning around him. $80,000 might as well have been $8 million. Even working around the clock for the rest of his life, he could never raise that kind of money. He sat there holding Dorothy's hand, watching the hope drain from her eyes, knowing that he was failing the most important person in his world. That night, as he pushed his cart through the empty hospital corridors, Hank felt older than his 79 years. The brief respite Travis had given them had been a gift beyond measure, but it wasn't enough. It would never be enough. He didn't notice the young man watching him from the nurse's station, or see the determination building in Travis Kelce's eyes as he witnessed the return of despair to someone who had already sacrificed everything. The news of Dorothy's worsening condition and the impossible cost of the experimental treatment hit Hank like a sledgehammer. That same night, he approached Mike Rodriguez about picking up additional shifts. Mike, a burly man in his 50s who had developed a genuine affection for the elderly janitor, looked concerned. "Hank, you're already working more hours than guys half your age. I don't think it's safe for you to take on any more." But Hank's desperation overrode any concerns about safety or health. "Mike, I need every hour you can give me. Dorothy's running out of time, and I'm running out of options." Against his better judgment, Mike agreed to let Hank take on the weekend maintenance contracts for 3 small office buildings downtown. It meant that Hank would be working 7 days a week, often 16 hours a day, for barely above minimum wage. But it was the only way he could see to make a dent in the enormous sum they needed. The routine became punishing beyond description. Hank would finish his hospital shift at 6 a.m., drive across town to the first office building, and clean until 2 p.m. Then he'd grab a quick nap in his car before starting on the second building. By the time he finished the third building and drove home, it was nearly midnight. He'd spend an hour with Dorothy, helping her with her medications and trying to hide his exhaustion before heading back to the hospital for his regular night shift. For the first week, Hank managed to maintain the pace through sheer willpower. He had calculated that if he could keep this schedule for 18 months, he might be able to save enough for Dorothy's treatment. It was an impossible goal that required an impossible schedule, but it was the only hope he had. Eddie Kowalski, a fellow janitor who had been working at the hospital for 15 years, began to notice changes in Hank. The older man's hands shook more violently. His breathing was increasingly labored, and he had developed a persistent cough that echoed through the hallways at night. "Hank, you look terrible," Eddie said one night as they passed each other in the hallway. "When's the last time you had a real meal or a full night's sleep?" Hank couldn't remember. He was surviving on coffee, vending machine sandwiches, and determination. His clothes hung even looser on his shrinking frame, and his face had taken on a grayish pallor that worried everyone who saw him. "I'm fine," Hank insisted, but his voice was weaker than it had been just weeks earlier. "Just need to keep pushing through." The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning in the fourth-floor bathroom. Hank had been on his feet for nearly 14 hours straight, moving from his night shift at the hospital directly to the office buildings without rest. As he bent over to clean the base of a toilet, the world started spinning around him. He tried to steady himself against the wall, but his legs gave out completely. The last thing he remembered was the cold tile floor rushing up to meet him as consciousness slipped away. Nurse Rebecca Walsh found him 20 minutes later, unconscious and barely breathing. She immediately called for an emergency team, and within minutes, Hank was being wheeled into the same emergency room where he had spent countless nights mopping floors. When he regained consciousness 6 hours later, he found himself in a hospital bed with an IV in his arm and Dr. Sarah Martinez, the ER physician, sitting beside him with a concerned expression. "Mr. Pemberton, you collapsed from severe dehydration and exhaustion. Your blood pressure was dangerously low, and your blood work shows signs of malnutrition. When's the last time you had a full meal and 8 hours of sleep?" Hank tried to calculate but couldn't remember. Days blended together, a fog of work and worry. "Doctor, I need to get back to work. I've got bills to pay and my wife needs—" "Mr. Pemberton," Dr. Martinez interrupted gently but firmly, "you nearly died. Your body is shutting down. If you continue at this pace, you won't be able to help anyone, including your wife." The words hit Hank harder than the physical collapse had. He wasn't just failing to save enough money for Dorothy's treatment. He was destroying himself in the process, which would leave her completely alone and unable to afford any treatment at all. As he lay in that hospital bed, Hank felt the weight of complete failure crushing down on him. 79 years of life, 52 years of marriage, and all the hard work in the world couldn't save the person he loved most. He had nothing left to give, and it still wasn't enough. Eddie Kowalski visited him that evening, bringing a cup of real coffee from the good machine in the administrative offices. "The hospital's giving you 3 days of sick leave," Eddie reported. "Mike Rodriguez said your job will be waiting when you're ready to come back, but he's worried about you, Hank." "We all are." Hank stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the small holes in each square. 3 days off meant 3 days without pay, which meant they'd be even further behind on Dorothy's treatment fund. Every hour he wasn't working was an hour Dorothy couldn't afford. "She deserves so much better than this," Hank whispered, tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. "Dorothy taught thousands of children, made the world a better place every single day. And I can't even earn enough money to keep her alive." Eddie sat quiet, not knowing what to say to a man whose love was literally killing him. Outside the hospital room window, Kansas City continued its daily rhythm, indifferent to the private tragedy playing out in room 314. Neither man noticed the figure standing in the hallway outside Hank's room, listening to every word through the partially open door. Travis Kelce had come to the hospital for another visit with the pediatric patients, but when he heard that the elderly janitor he'd helped was now a patient himself, he couldn't stay away. What he heard in that room, the raw desperation, the complete exhaustion, the overwhelming love of a man willing to work himself to death for his wife, would haunt Travis for days and ultimately lead him to make a decision that would change everything. Travis stood in the hallway for several minutes after Eddie left, processing what he had just heard. The image of Hank lying in that hospital bed, defeated and broken, was seared into his memory. Here was a man who had given everything and still faced the impossible choice of watching his wife die, or literally working himself to death, trying to save her. When Travis finally knocked on the doorframe and entered the room, Hank looked up with surprise and embarrassment. "Travis, what are you doing here? You shouldn't waste your time on an old fool like me." "You're not a fool, Mr. Pemberton," Travis said, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "You're a man who loves his wife. There's nothing foolish about that." Travis had been thinking about Hank constantly since their first meeting. In a world where Travis was surrounded by people who wanted something from him, endorsements, appearances, money, this elderly janitor had asked for nothing except the dignity to work for what he needed. The purity of that approach had struck Travis profoundly. "Tell me about Dorothy," Travis said. "Tell me how you met her." Hank's eyes brightened slightly at the mention of his wife's name. "It was 1971. I was working at the Ford plant, just 26 years old, thought I knew everything about everything. Dorothy was teaching at the elementary school near the plant. I used to see her walking to work every morning when I was heading home from the night shift." As Hank spoke, his voice grew stronger, the memories bringing him back to life in a way that rest and medical treatment couldn't. "Took me 3 months to work up the courage to say hello. She was so beautiful, so smart. I couldn't figure out why a classy lady like that would want anything to do with a grease monkey like me. But she did," Travis prompted, genuinely interested in the story. "She did," Hank smiled, the first real smile Travis had seen from him. "Turned out we both loved baseball, both grew up poor but determined to make something of ourselves. She saw something in me that I didn't even see in myself. Dorothy always said I was the kindest man she'd ever met, which was funny because I thought I was just ordinary." Travis found himself thinking about his own grandparents, who had worked hard their entire lives and faced similar struggles in their golden years. His grandfather had been a steel worker in Cleveland. His grandmother a seamstress. They had taught him that real wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the depth of your relation and the integrity of your character. "She sounds like an extraordinary woman," Travis said. "She is," Hank replied emphatically. "Do you know that in 35 years of teaching, Dorothy never missed a single parent-teacher conference? Even when she was sick, even when we were going through tough times, she was always there for those kids. She used to spend her own money buying school supplies for students whose families couldn't afford them." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Hank sharing stories of their life together. The lean years when they were first married, the joy of buying their small house, the disappointment of never having children, and how Dorothy had channeled all her maternal love into her student. The pride they felt when Hank was promoted to maintenance supervisor after 20 years at the plant. "We weren't rich," Hank said, "but we were happy. We had each other, we had our health, we had our work. It seemed like enough. We thought we'd saved enough for retirement, you know? We were careful with money, never spent more than we had, but nobody plans for cancer." Travis understood the bitter irony. Two people who had done everything right, who had worked hard and saved responsibly, were being destroyed by circumstances completely beyond their control. The American healthcare system, which was supposed to protect people like the Pembertons, had instead become the instrument of their destruction. "Hank," Travis said carefully, "I want to help you with Dorothy's treatment costs. Not as charity, but because what you're doing is important. Love like yours should be supported, not punished." But Hank's response was immediate and firm. "I appreciate what you did before, Travis. I really do. I can't accept that kind of money. $80,000? That's more than I made in 2 years at the plant. I've worked my whole life, and I won't start taking handouts now." Travis had expected this response, but it still frustrated him. Here was a man literally dying from the effort to save his wife, and pride was preventing him from accepting help that would solve their problems instantly. "It's not a handout. It's recognition of what you and Dorothy have contributed to your community. She taught thousands of children. You helped build cars that families depended on. You've both earned this help." But Hank was unmovable. "No, son, I know you mean well, but I have to be able to look at myself in the mirror. I have to know that whatever happens to Dorothy, we faced it with our own strength and our own resources." Travis left the hospital that day with a heavy heart and a growing determination. He couldn't force Hank to accept direct financial help, but there had to be another way. As he drove through the streets of Kansas City, he found himself thinking about dignity and pride, about the difference between charity and recognition, about finding a solution that would preserve Hank's self-respect while saving Dorothy's life. The answer came to him 3 days later, while he was reviewing his own foundation's activities. If he couldn't help Hank as an individual, maybe he could help him as part of something large. Maybe there was a way to frame assistance not as charity, but as the recognition and support that long-term workers like Hank deserve. That evening, Travis began making phone calls to hospital administrators, community leaders, and his own foundation staff. By the time he went to sleep, the skeleton of a plan was forming in his mind. A plan that would not only help the Pemberton, but potentially dozens of other families facing similar crises. Hank returned to work the following Monday, against doctor's orders but driven by necessity. He was weaker than before his collapse, moving more slowly and taking more frequent breaks. But he was determined to continue earning money for Dorothy's treatment fund. He had no idea that Travis Kelce was working behind the scenes to create a solution that would change their lives while preserving the dignity that meant everything to a proud man who had worked hard for 79 years. Travis spent the next week in intense planning sessions with Patricia Chen, the hospital administrator, Dr. Margaret Steinberg, and several community leaders. His idea was ambitious but simple. Create a formal recognition program for long-term hospital employees who were facing medical crises, framing financial assistance not as charity, but as earned benefit for dedicated service. We're calling it the Veterans of Service Medical Assistance Program, Travis explained during a meeting in Patricia Chen's office. It recognizes employees who have worked in healthcare or essential services for more than 20 years and are facing extraordinary medical expenses. The beauty of the plan was that it wasn't just about Hank. Research had revealed that several other long-term hospital employees were struggling with medical costs, creating a legitimate need for such a program. Hank would be the first recipient, but he wouldn't be the only one. Patricia Chen had initially been skeptical about the proposal, worried about setting precedents that the hospital couldn't sustain long-term. But as Travis outlined the funding structure and community partnerships he was developing, her concerns began to shift toward genuine enthusiasm. "We've got Maria Santos in housekeeping," Patricia said, reviewing the list of potential beneficiaries. 23 years here, and her husband needs dialysis 3 times a week. Then there's Robert Kim in maintenance, whose daughter was born with spina bifida. The medical costs have been crushing these families for years. Dr. Steinberg was immediately supportive. "I've been watching Mr. Pemberton work himself to death for months," she said. "This gives us a way to help him without damaging his pride. But more than that, it addresses a systemic problem we see constantly. Good people destroyed by medical costs they can't control." But Travis was having second thoughts about the entire approach. Late at night in his hotel room, he found himself staring at the ceiling, wrestling with questions that had no easy answers. Was he being manipulative? Was he trying to trick Hank into accepting help? These questions haunted him as he refined the details of the program. His mind kept drifting back to his childhood, to summers spent with his grandparents in Cleveland. His grandfather, Frank Kelce Sr., had worked in the steel mills for 42 years. Travis could still remember the man's hand, scarred, permanently stained, but gentle. He helped 5-year-old Travis tie his shoes or cast a fishing line. "Work ain't just about the paycheck, Travis," his grandfather had told him during one of their fishing trips. "Work is about contributing something to the world, about being useful, about maintaining your dignity through what you do with your hands and your time." His grandmother, Eleanor, had been a seamstress who took in alterations and repairs to supplement his grandfather's income. Travis remembered her hunched over her sewing machine late into the night, working by lamplight to finish a wedding dress or repair a torn jacket. She never complained, never spoke about the arthritis that made every stitch painful. "Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help someone help themselves," she had told Travis when he was 12 and struggling with whether to help a classmate who was being bullied. "But you got to do it in a way that lets them keep their dignity intact." The memory of those words echoed in Travis's mind as he developed the assistance program. Was he helping Hank help himself? Or was he just salving his own conscience with an elaborate deception? The internal struggle intensified when Travis visited the hospital again and saw Hank pushing his cart through the corridors, moving even more slowly before. The old man's breathing was labored, his hands shook constantly, and his uniform hung on his frame like a scarecrow's clothes. "Hank looks terrible," Nurse Rebecca Walsh confided to Travis during his visit. "We're all worried he's going to collapse again." maybe permanently this time. But he won't listen to anyone about slowing down. Yesterday I found him in the supply closet, sitting on a box of towels with his head in his hand, just trying to catch his breath. Travis watched Hank work for several minutes, observing the careful, methodical way the elderly man approached tasks. Despite his physical deterioration, Hank's work was still thorough and professional. He took pride in doing the job right, even when his body was failing him. Eddie Kowalski approached Travis in the hallway, his expression grave. "You're that football player who's been asking about Hank, right?" "Yes, I'm Travis Kelce. Look, I don't know what your interest is in all this, but I need to tell you something. Hank collapsed in the bathroom yesterday. Not passed out like before, but just broke down crying. I found him there, sobbing like a child, saying he was failing Dorothy and didn't know what else to do." Eddie's words hit Travis like a physical blow. "Is he okay now?" He pulled himself together and finished his shift. "But it ain't right, man. Nobody should have to work themselves to death just to keep their wife alive. Hank's a good man, maybe the best man I know, and watching this happen to him is killing all of us." The conversation with Eddie crystallized Travis's resolve. Whatever his motivations, whatever the ethical complexities, Hank was running out of time. Pride was a luxury that the Pemberton family could no longer afford. Travis spent the next 2 days reaching out to former patients of Dorothy, tracking down people who had been in her second-grade classes decades earlier. The response was overwhelming. Dozens of adults, now in their 30s and 40s, remembered Dorothy Pemberton as the teacher who had changed their lives. "Mrs. Pemberton taught me to read," said Jennifer Walsh, now a nurse at a different hospital. "I was struggling, falling behind, and she stayed after school with me every day for 2 months until I caught up. She never made me feel stupid or different. She bought me winter boots when my family couldn't afford them," remembered Marcus Thompson, now a successful accountant. "Told my mom they were extras the school had ordered. Years later, I realized she probably bought them with her own money." Story after story poured in, creating a picture of a woman who had touched hundreds of lives through her dedication to teaching. Travis began to understand that helping Dorothy wasn't just about saving one person. It was about preserving someone who had made the world measurably better. When Travis approached Hank that evening, the elderly janitor straightened up with obvious effort. "Travis, good to see you again. How are those young patients upstairs doing?" "They're doing well, thanks to people like you who keep this place clean and safe," Travis replied. "Hank, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Hank set down his mop and gave Travis his full attention, though the simple act of standing still seemed to require tremendous effort. If someone had worked at a company for 38 years and that company had a program to help long-term employees with medical expenses, would you think it was charity for that person to accept the help? Hank considered the question carefully, his tired mind working through the implication. Well, no. If it was a company benefit, something they earned through their years of service, that would be different. That would be part of their compensation package. What if it wasn't their original company, but a recognition program that honored the contribution of long-term workers in essential services? Hank's eyes narrowed slightly, and Travis could see the sharp intelligence that had made him a successful supervisor at the Ford plant. "Travis, what are you getting at?" Travis took a deep breath. This was the moment of truth, the culmination of weeks of planning and soul-searching. "The hospital is starting a new program to recognize employees who have dedicated decades of their lives to essential work. It's called the Veterans of Service Medical Assistance Program. You qualify because of your years at the Ford plant and your service here." Hank was quiet for a long moment, processing what Travis had said. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "This is about me and Dorothy, isn't it? It's about recognizing that people who have given decades of their lives to important work deserve support when they face medical crises." Travis replied honestly. "But yes, you're one of the people we're hoping to help." "How much help?" Hank asked quietly. And Travis could hear the war between hope and suspicion in those 3 words. "Enough to cover Dorothy's experimental treatment and your ongoing medical expense, Travis. Enough so that you can focus on being her husband instead of working yourself to death." Hank leaned against his cart, the weight of the decision visible on his weathered face. "I don't want charity, Travis. I've never taken charity in my life. My daddy taught me that a man takes care of his own problems. This isn't charity, Hank. This is recognition. This is society saying that 38 years at the Ford plant and 3 years keeping this hospital clean and safe means something. This is acknowledgement that you and Dorothy have earned the right to fight cancer without destroying yourselves financially. The conversation was interrupted by Mike Rodriguez, who approached with obvious concern etched on his face. "Hank, you need to take a break. You've been on your feet for 6 hours straight, and I can see you swaying." "I'm fine, Mike," Hank replied automatically, but his voice lacked conviction, and his grip on the mop handle was visibly unsteady. "No, you're not fine," Mike said firmly but kindly. "Look, I know you need the work, but if you collapse again, I'm going to have to put you on medical leave. The liability issues alone would shut down the whole department. The hospital can't risk having employees working in unsafe conditions." After Mike left, Hank turned back to Travis, with tears gathering in his eyes. "I'm not even sure I can keep this job much longer. My body's giving out on me, but Dorothy needs that treatment. What am I supposed to do? How do I choose between my wife's life and my own principle?" "You're supposed to let people who care about you help," Travis said gently. "You're supposed to accept that 41 years of honest work has earned you the right to support when you need it most. This isn't about abandoning your principles, Hank. This is about recognizing that sometimes accepting help is the strongest thing you can do." Hank was quiet for several minutes, staring at the mop in his hands as if it held the answers to all of life's impossible questions. Finally, he looked up at Travis with a mixture of hope and fear. "If I accept this program, what do I have to do? What are the requirements? What strings are attached?" "Just keep being the man you've always been," Travis replied. "Keep loving Dorothy. Keep maintaining your dignity. Keep showing up when it matters. The program covers the medical expenses, but it doesn't change who you are or what you've accomplished. And this is really a legitimate program, not just something you created to help me specifically?" Travis smiled, understanding the crucial importance of this question to Hank's sense of dignity. "Hank, you're not the only hospital employee struggling with medical costs. This program will help several families. You're the first recipient, but you won't be the last. We've already identified 6 other long-term workers who qualify for assistance." That night, Hank went home and had the longest, most honest conversation he'd had with Dorothy in months. They talked about pride and practicality, about the difference between earning help and accepting charity, about the meaning of a lifetime of honest work, and whether circumstances could ever justify setting aside the principles that had guided them for more than 50 years. By morning, they had made their decision. The call came at 7 a.m. on a Thursday morning. Hank's voice was steadier than Travis had heard it in weeks. "Travis, if that program you talked about is real, if it's truly something I've earned through my work, then Dorothy and I would like to accept it." Travis felt a wave of relief wash over him. "It's real, Hank. Everything is already set up. I just need you to come in this afternoon to sign some paperwork." The Veterans of Service Medical Assistance Program was officially launched at Kansas City General Hospital the following week. Hank was introduced not as a charity, but as a respected veteran of essential service whose decades of contribution to the community had earned him recognition and support during a medical crisis. Patricia Chen, the hospital administrator, spoke about the importance of supporting workers who had dedicated their lives to serving others. Darren Steinberg discussed the medical realities facing families dealing with serious illnesses, and Travis, speaking as the program's primary supporter, emphasized that helping people like Hank wasn't charity. It was an investment in the values that built strong community. Hank sat in the front row, wearing his best suit from 1995, holding Dorothy's hand as speaker after speaker recognized his decades of honest work. For the first time in 3 years, he looked proud instead of desperate. The program covered not only Dorothy's experimental treatment, but also provided a modest monthly stipend that allowed Hank to reduce his work schedule to a manageable 30 hours per week. More importantly, it restored his sense of dignity and purpose. Dorothy's response to the experimental treatment exceeded everyone's expectation. Within 6 weeks, her cancer markers had dropped significantly, and her energy began returning. She was able to attend the hospital's recognition ceremony for program recipients, where she met the families of other long-term workers who had been struggling with medical crises. "I can't believe how many people are in situations like ours," Dorothy told Travis after the ceremony. "It makes me feel less alone, knowing we're not the only ones who worked hard all our lives and still ended up in trouble." The program's success attracted attention from other hospitals in the Kansas City area, and within 6 months, 3 other medical centers had implemented similar recognition programs for long-term essential workers. Travis quietly funded the initial phases of each program, but increasingly, community donations and hospital partnerships were sustaining the effort. Hank continued working at the hospital, but now his shifts were manageable and his purpose was clear. He had become an informal mentor to younger maintenance staff, sharing not just practical knowledge, but the deeper wisdom that came from decades of honest work. The thing about work, Hank told Eddie Kowalski one evening as they finished their shifts, is that it's not just about the paycheck. It's about contributing something to the world, about being useful, about maintaining your dignity through what you do with your hands and your time. Eddie, who had watched Hank's transformation over the past months, nodded thoughtfully. "You look different now, Hank, like the weight of the world isn't on your shoulders anymore." "It's not," Hank replied. "For 3 years, I was carrying Dorothy's life and my own dignity, and I was afraid I'd lose. Now I know that work has value beyond just earning money. The work itself, done with integrity and care, means something." 6 months after joining the program, Dorothy was declared to be in remission. Her doctor was cautiously optimistic about her long-term prognosis, and she had regained enough strength to volunteer at the hospital's children's reading program, bringing her teaching skills to young patients who needed both education and comfort. Travis continued to visit the hospital regularly, not for publicity or recognition, but because he had developed genuine friendships with the families affected by the program. He often found Hank in the break room during his dinner break, sharing coffee and conversation about everything from baseball to the meaning of a life well lived. "Travis," Hank said during one of these conversations, "I need to tell you something that's been on my mind." "What's that, Hank?" "When I first met you, I thought you were just another rich young man looking for a good deed to make himself feel better. I was wrong about that, and I want to apologize." Travis waved off the apology, but Hank continued, "What you did wasn't about making yourself feel better. It was about recognizing that honest work has value, that people who contribute to their communities deserve support when they face crises they can't handle alone. You found a way to help us without making us feel small." Travis looked at this man who had taught him so much about dignity, perseverance, and the true meaning of love. "Hank, you and Dorothy taught me something I needed to learn. You showed me that real wealth isn't about how much money you have, it's about how much you're willing to sacrifice for the people you love, and how you maintain your integrity even when life becomes impossibly difficult." As autumn turned to winter in Kansas City, Hank continued his work at the hospital with renewed energy and purpose. His shifts were shorter now, his breathing easier, his step more confident. Dorothy accompanied him to work occasionally, volunteering in the children's ward and bringing homemade cookies to the night shift staff. One December evening, as Hank was finishing his shift, he found Travis waiting in the lobby with a small wrapped package. "What's this?" Hank asked. "It's your 53rd wedding anniversary next week," Travis replied. "I thought you and Dorothy might like to celebrate properly this year." Inside the package was a gift certificate to the same restaurant where Hank and Dorothy had celebrated their 25th anniversary, before medical bills made such luxuries impossible. Hank looked at the gift certificate, then back at Travis, his eyes bright with tears of gratitude. "You know what the best part of this is? It's not the money or the treatment or even Dorothy getting better, though I thank God for all of that." "What's the best part?" Travis asked. Hank smiled, the same proud smile he had worn on his wedding day 52 years earlier. "The best part is that I can look in the mirror every morning and know that I took care of my wife with dignity, that I worked for what we needed, that I earned the help we received, and that love and hard work still matter in this world." He paused, gripping Travis's hand firmly. "Thank you for reminding me that accepting recognition for a lifetime of honest work isn't the same as giving up. Sometimes the greatest kindness is helping someone maintain their dignity while you're saving their life."